Today I want to talk about relationships that elevate. I want to talk about relationships that elevate and how do we experience friendships and relationships that elevate our lives. And at first I was going to really make the bulk of this teaching all about how do you find friendships that elevate you. And while that might be an interesting teaching, my concern as I was working on it, and it was kind of going that direction, was am I feeding that sort of cultural narcissism that can creep into how we relate to one another and how we think about friendships and relationships? Where we sort of think that every friendship, at the end of the day, the ultimate metric is how does that friendship benefit me? And a lot of times, if we're not careful, we'll go, well, if it doesn't benefit me, then I'll find somebody else that will benefit me. And while it's benefiting you, the relationship's good. But as soon as it stops benefiting you, then you go to the next friendship that will hopefully benefit you. And it's not your fault. We're mentored by a culture that says you are the center of the story. And if you're not careful, you'll bring that ideology into your friendships where everything about your friendships are, how does it elevate me? And so what I don't want to do today is accidentally feed that beast of cultural narcissism, because I believe that Jesus has invited us as followers of Jesus into a better way, into a new way, into a higher way, into a more beautiful way to relate to one another. And so instead of taking a teaching and talking about how can you find friends that elevate you, I want to turn the tables on the topic and talk for a few minutes about how can you elevate your friends? How can you be the kind of friend for others that you want them to be for you? How do we elevate in our friendships and in our relationships? And so I want to look at a passage of Scripture. If you have your Bible, you can open up to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. If not, the words will be on the screen. But Ecclesiastes 4 is written by a man named Solomon, and it was written around 931 BC. And you might not know who Solomon is, but he was the king of Israel, one of the most famous kings of Israel. And Scripture even says that this guy, Solomon, was the wisest person to have ever lived. And so we're going to look at the words of a person that the Scriptures say was extremely wise, the wisest to ever live, because he says a lot about relationships here in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Now, what's interesting about this particular passage is that it has sort of over the course of a few thousand years, over the course of time, we've sort of taken this passage and we've applied it only to marriage. This is one of those verses that if you go to a lot of weddings, you'll probably hear this verse said one or two or multiple times. The problem isn't necessarily that it doesn't apply to marriage. The problem is I don't think that's what Solomon was writing this for. I don't think Solomon was writing this passage for couples. I don't think Solomon wrote what he wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 thinking to himself, man, people are going to say this at every wedding from here on out. I don't think that's why he wrote it. I think he was writing it to all people, not just married couples, and he was inviting people into a new vision, a new understanding of how to relate to one another and how to elevate your relationships. And so I want to look at these words because Solomon here really gives us a simple roadmap on how to elevate the relationships in your life. So if you're a point person, you like having like that kind of structured sort of talk, you're going to love today's teaching. Take out your notes. You can follow along. But there's really four main ideas that Solomon, he says, if you want to elevate your relationships, here's a good place to start. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9, Solomon, he writes this. He says, two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone. I always hear like the voice of Mr. T when I read that, but I pity the fool who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So Solomon here is making it abundantly clear, something that he must believe with deep conviction, something that I've said multiple times that you likely know, but it's easy to forget in a city like San Francisco. And what Solomon seems to believe is that you are better. You are at your best version of yourself when you're doing life with others. That your life will never be fully alive or fully as God intended it as long as you're navigating this life in a silo all by yourself. Solomon is telling us here that there's really nothing that can replace your need for friendship. There's no amount of money you could ever earn that would replace your need for friendship. There's no title that you could ever be promoted to that would ever replace your need for friendship. There's no success that you could ever attain in your startup that would ever replace your need for friendship. You could be the smartest person, the strongest person, the wisest person, the wealthiest person. You could be living with great purpose and clear intention, even with God-driven purpose. But if you're doing life alone, you're doing life beneath the life that God created you to live. Because you and I are not designed to do life alone. And you might hear that and think to yourself, but what about my dreams? Right? Because we live in a world and a culture, again, that is constantly saying that all that matters most is your dreams and your purpose. So you might be going like, well, what about my dreams? Well, I would say this, that if you have dreams that you can accomplish without people, that your dream is too small. What about my purpose? Well, I would say if you have a purpose that you can achieve all on your own, you don't need anybody's help to achieve that purpose and to actualize that purpose, then while it might feel and look like purpose, it is not the purpose that God has ever intended for your life, because God will never give you a dream and God will never give you a purpose that you can materialize without other people in your life. I mean, has it ever occurred to you that there is not one single talent that you have that has any value outside of people? There's not one talent that you possess that you do not need people for that talent to have its power. I've never been one to have a ton of identifiable talent. I'm not the most athletic person in the world. Stu went surfing with me, nearly killed me out there. He knows this firsthand. I'm not the most athletic person, not the strongest person in the world. I'm not the smartest person in the world. I'm not like our worship team. I cannot sing at all. Like if God forbid I ever had to lead worship on a Sunday, you would all be atheists by the end of the first song. You would be, there's not a good God if that's what came out of Travis's mouth. It's not good. I don't have a whole lot of talent. If I have one talent though that's identifiable, it is, I guess I can communicate to a certain degree of effectiveness. But it's sort of a lousy talent, if I'm honest. It's a talent that most people would rather die than have, because most recent studies say that people actually fear public speaking more than death. And I have this talent to public speak, and some people are like, you can keep that talent, have that talent, but that talent is only good with people. Because if I don't have people, I'm just talking to myself. Right? I actually need you to bring value to my talent. If I stand up here with a teaching I prepared and no one shows up on a Sunday, it sort of takes the life out of whatever talent I possess. And that's not just true for me, it's true for you. That every single talent that you have, the power of your talent is activated when you have people in your life. What good is it if you're a talented cook if you have no one to share a meal with? What good is it if you are a talented leader if you have no one following you on your team? What good is it if you're a comedian if no one's there to laugh? And what good is it if you're a lawyer if there's no people to sue? Like we all need people for our talents to have value. And that's hard to hear maybe for some of us because we live in a city like San Francisco, and I'm not going to say anything you don't know. You know this, right? We live in a city of San Francisco that we measure success by profit. But Jesus says, no, actually success is measured by people. It's measured by the people that you do life with. It's measured by the people that your talent, that your passion, that your skill, how it elevates their life. And so if we're going to live this life fully alive, we're going to have to become the kind of people that when others get in our orbit, we elevate their lives. Are people elevated when they get in your orbit? Are people elevated when they become your friend? And how do we know if we're living out relationships that elevate and if you're being a friend that elevates the friends that you have? Here's the first thing that Solomon shows us. In Ecclesiastes 4, he says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. And so the first basic assumption about relationships that elevate, according to Solomon, is Solomon tells us that relationships that elevate make one another better. That if you want to elevate others around you, the friends that you have, then you need to be committed not just to them making you better, but even more, you got to be committed. How am I going to make others around me, my people around me, how am I actually going to make them better? I mean, Solomon's math is pretty simple. 2 is better than 1. But if you're anything like me and you tend to tilt on the more independent side, any of my independent people here, then you know that sometimes you don't agree with Solomon. Sometimes 2 does not feel better than 1. Sometimes 1 feels much, much better than 2. Do you know anybody that, or maybe if you're willing to admit it, like it's hard for you sometimes to delegate tasks to people that you know and to empower them because in the back of your head you're going, I would do this so much better and so much quicker, right? And maybe you work for a person like that and it doesn't elevate you, does it? It kind of crushes you. See, what Solomon is saying here though is that 2 is better than 1. As strong as you are, smart as you are, and as skilled as you are, 2 will always be better than 1, but I don't always agree, and neither do you. Have you ever put together IKEA furniture with somebody else, right? If you're engaged or thinking about getting engaged and wondering whether or not this person is the one for you, let me give you the best premarital counseling you could ever do. Go and put IKEA furniture together. And if you still love each other and want to be married at the end, then perhaps you have the substance to be married with one another. Some of my biggest fights with Jenna has come over IKEA furniture. I mean, it's bad. Every time we assemble IKEA furniture, Finley always comes in the room and asks if we're going to get a divorce by the end of it. It's just never a pretty sight because Jen and I, we could not look at the task more differently. Have you ever known someone that you're looking at the same task, but you both are running very different plays? Right? Jenna is this person. It's sort of annoying. She's this person that when we get like an IKEA piece of furniture together, she's that person. You know them. They're frustrating. They want to follow the directions, right? They want to look at the manual. And so Jenna, she's one of these people, and she'll get every screw, every nut, every bolt, every different size bolt, and she'll put them in their groups and their categories, every one of those wood pegs. She'll double count them to make sure we have enough, and she'll make sure that we have all 3,000 Allen wrenches that come in every piece of IKEA furniture. And it slows everything down. It's so frustrating because I'm the opposite. I'm like, I don't need some poorly drawn stick figure from IKEA to tell me how to put together this coffee table. If we put a man on the moon, surely we can figure this out. And I just want to dive right in. And it's only taken me 17 years of marriage and hundreds of pieces of IKEA furniture later to finally admit it. Jenna's way is better. She's not in the room. Don't tell her. If you tell her, I'll say, what are you talking about? Her way is better. And to be totally honest, she because of Jenna, we have successfully assembled many pieces of furniture together as opposed to destroying them, which would have happened if you've done it my way. Jenna, she makes me better. She's different, but she does make me better. And in different ways, I make her better. And this leads to really an important truth that it's not just that you need another person in your life. You need the right person in your life, right? Like, it's not just any 2 is better than 1. You need the right 2. I talked about this in the very first week when I talked about how to find your people. It's a truth that sometimes we don't like to say out loud, but we all know is true. All people are not your people, and that's okay. It's okay to say they're great people, they're just not my people. And when it comes to 2 being better than 1, making sure that the other person is the right person is so important because Solomon says when you have 2 people, the right people together, then they make one another better. Have you ever been in a relationship, though, where it's the polar opposite? You don't make one another better, you actually make one another worse. Have you ever seen a couple dating, maybe a friend of yours dating somebody, and you're looking at them and you're like, you guys make each other worse? Somebody laughed. All right, I love it. I mean, chances are you've seen that. And have you ever known that person that's been in a relationship that's making one another worse, and then that relationship, obviously, it ends eventually, and then that person goes into another relationship, and they find themselves in the exact same scenario, making one another worse with the wrong person, and then they break up with that person, they get in another relationship, and it's again with the wrong person. We're seeing this pattern again and again and again here, and then that person goes, why do I keep choosing self-destructive and unhealthy relationships instead of beneficial and healthy relationships? And here's my guess. And it's maybe not the easiest pill to swallow, but if we're not careful, we can choose people that reflect the worst part of our lives. That we could surround ourselves with people that actually reflect the worst part of our lives. And why in the world would we do that? Here's my guess. It's because when we surround ourselves with people that reflect the worst part of our lives, it justifies ourselves of living in that space. All right, you know the saying, misery loves company? You ever wonder why that's the case? Why would misery love company? Well, because if I'm miserable and I can get around other people who are miserable, it will validate and justify my misery. See, you need to get people around you that are different than you. They have strengths that are stronger than yours. They see life from a different perspective, and together you make one another better. If you're going to break this cycle, why do I keep getting sucked into these same relationships? Oftentimes we blame the other person, but perhaps we should pause and go, what is it in me? What's happening in me that needs to be investigated? How do I get people around me who are strong where I'm weak, who are smart where I may not be as smart, who are wise where I maybe am not as wise? How do I get the right person? Because I know if I get the right person, two is better than one. So let me ask you a question. Who would say their life has gotten better because of their friendship with you? Is there anybody in your life right now and they were like, oh my gosh, I'm a better person because of them, because of you? They elevate my life. They make me smarter, stronger, wiser. They bring more joy and love and hope. When I'm around them, everything gets elevated. And Solomon, I love it. He says that there's labor required in relationship. And you know what's frustrating when a relationship is all labor and no return? You're pouring out and pouring out, or they're pouring into you, and there's no return either way. Solomon is saying, hey, there's labor in a relationship. So if you're going to labor in a relationship, you might as well make sure it's the right person. You might as well make sure that it's a relationship that makes both people better. How do we elevate our relationships? We got to make one another better. Solomon, he continues, he says in verse 10, if either of them falls down, no one can help. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. See, relationships that elevate one another, Solomon, he says, first, it makes one another better. And then the second is relationships that elevate, they stand in one another's weaknesses. So if you're going to have a relationship that elevates, it's good to make them better, but are you also willing to stand with them when they're at their worst? Are you willing to stand with them when they're in their lowest moment? Are you willing to stand with them in their weakness? Are you willing to stand with them in their struggle? Stand with them in their failure? Stand with them in their darkest moment and not walk away from them? When you have a relationship that elevates, you know that that person will be with you through the thick and through the thin. That you know that if you needed to call someone at 2 a.m. because life was falling apart, you know that they would answer. See, that's a relationship that elevates. You stand with one another in your weaknesses. And I've known people who have failed and they did not move past their failures. And chances are you've probably known people who have failed and struggled to move past or maybe didn't move past. And it's not because they weren't strong enough. And it's not because they wanted to remain in their failure, because no one wants to remain in their failure. But one of the most common reasons people get trapped in their failure is they have no one there to pick them up. No one there to extend a hand in their lowest moment and pull them out of the mud that they find themselves in. And by the way, I've never met a person who just, the entire universe is rigged against them or every person doesn't like them. Here's what I found, though, is that there's never been a person who doesn't have anybody who never cared for them or never showed up for them or never loved them. But what you do find a lot is you get a lot of people that they act like they don't need anybody for so long. They pretend that they don't need anybody's help for so long. They push away every hand that's extended to them. They pretend that they don't need the help of anybody. And then eventually they alienate all those people who actually cared so much about them that they find themselves at a point where they actually do need somebody, and now they don't have anybody because they pushed away everybody. See, here's the thing. Like, if you act like you don't need anybody in this life, and I meet people all the time, maybe you're one of them here at Canvas, you're going through something and somebody's like, how are you doing? You're like, I'm good. No, I'm good. It's always your response. Like if you act like you don't need anybody, eventually you'll get to prove it. Like eventually, if you live in that space long enough that I don't need anybody's help, you'll eventually get to prove it. You see, you need people. I need people. You need people. We need people who are there when we fall. And you want to know the relational hack to like make sure that you always have someone there reaching out when you fall? Here's the hack. If you want to make sure that someone is there when you fall, then you need to be the kind of person that is there for somebody else when they fall. You want to make sure that when you fall, because you will, when you go through a dark moment, because you will, when you're struggling, because you will, if you want to make sure that you have people there with arms extended, ready to pull you out of whatever it is you find yourself in, then you need to be the kind of friend that you want them to be to you and be somebody when they are in their lowest moment. See, if you want to experience relationships that elevate, you got to be willing to stand with someone in their weakness. But again, this is sort of hard, right? Because we don't live in a culture that celebrates that, right? Like almost when we see it, we're almost like that's the exception, but not the rule. We sort of live in a culture that doesn't say stand with people in their worst moment. Well, we live in a culture that says cancel them in their worst moment. Let's drudge up their worst moment from 10 years ago to prove that they haven't ever changed. Like we live in a culture that tends to measure us by our lowest moment. I mean, all you got to do is stand at a checkout aisle at Target. I did this yesterday. And you look at the magazines, and what typically makes the front cover of most of these magazines? It is not people's best moments. What sells magazines are people's worst moments. Why do so many people tune in to the final rows of The Bachelor? To see people firsthand in their worst moments. It's like we feast on it and culture celebrates it. I think about what, any Office fans here? TV show The Office? Okay, cool. 2 of you. So Dwight Schrute from the TV show The Office, one of my favorite lines from Dwight is he says this. He says, I love catching people in the act. That's why I always whip open doors, which I think it's amazing. And we sort of like live in that culture that's like, whipping open the door. Let's see if we can catch people in their worst moment. But can I say something about that? Like how we respond to someone's failure, it says a lot more about us than it says about them. Like who you are and how you show up in someone's worst moment, it really says a lot more about you than it does about them. If you want to have relationships that elevate, it will require you to stand with someone in their weakness. It will require you to stand with someone in their lowest moment and say, I'm not leaving. Everybody else might have left, but I'm not leaving. Relationships that elevate, they make you better. They stand in your weakness. And then Solomon, he says, also, if two lie together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? So the third thing Solomon says, he says, you got to make one another better. You got to stand with one another in their weaknesses. And the third part is this. He says, you got to trust one another. This idea of laying with one another to keep one another warm, it's this picture of a person who they got your back. You feel safe in their presence. You trust their intentions. And again, because we've sort of only applied this passage to marriage, that a lot of us have concluded that what Solomon here is talking about, he's talking about a husband and a wife or a couple there having sex. And that's not what Solomon's writing about here, though. It's not what he's talking about, actually, like at all. Remember the world that he's living in where it would have been common to sleep in a cave with a person, a friend, and in order to keep warm, to prevent frostbite, you would have to get close to each other and keep one another warm. Or if you were sleeping in the middle of nowhere to protect one another from a predator, you would have to sleep near one another. It was this picture of protection, a picture of trust. This idea that I'm safe with this person. Jen and I, in a few weeks, we're going to celebrate being married 18 years. Amazing. Time flies. And you know what's crazy, though? Over 18 years, there has not been one single moment where I've gone to sleep next to Jenna and wondered if she was going to kill me while I was asleep. It's amazing. I mean, sometimes she maybe wants to, but over 18 years, I trust that she'll never follow through with it. Like I know that like Jenna would give her life for me. And you know what? She knows I would give my life for her. Like I wonder who it is in your life that because they're in your life, you feel a little bit more safe. Like I wonder who it is in your life that you know if if everything fell apart, I know that this person would be the first on the scene of it all. And they would be there to pick me up and do whatever it took. Life is really hard when you don't have an answer to that question. Life is really scary when you don't have an answer to that question. That if I was in the worst moment, who would be there keeping me safe? Who do I trust? And by the way, the church was always meant to be that. The church was always meant to be not a service you attend, but a people you belong to. And even more than just a people you belong to, a people that you know, you can trust, and you're safe because of them. The church was always meant to make you feel safer in a dangerous, crazy, wild world, because you know if everything fell apart, your people, your church would stand with you and never abandon you. And it's unfortunate because for many of you, you're like, that's not how I view the church. That's not my experience in the church. Some of you, you've had an experience where the church is judgmental, where it's all about comparison, and that you're in a room full of people and yet completely lonely all at the same time. And I think there's something in us that knows that's not right. In fact, many times the church gets the bad rap for being an unsafe place, but the world is an unsafe place. It's just when you're unsafe in the church, there's just nothing that feels right about that. It feels like the church should be the place where you can at least know these people have my back no matter what. I trust them and they can trust me. You want relationships that elevate? You got to make one another better. You got to stand with one another in their weaknesses. You got to trust one another. And then Solomon, he says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And so the fourth thing that Solomon says, he's like, if you want to elevate your relationships, you got to make one another stronger. You got to actually make one another stronger. Now, I think it's fairly obvious that I don't spend a lot of time in the gym. And it's okay to say it out loud. But the little I have spent in the gym, the little I know about strength training, I know that if you want to grow your strength and you want to grow your muscles, at some point you need resistance. You need to increase the weight. That tension, it makes you stronger. You need something pushing against you as you push against it, and through that is strength being built and formed. And it's the same with relationships that you want to elevate. That you need friends who are willing to push you. You need friends who are willing to create a healthy amount of resistance in your life in order to help you grow. You need friends who are willing to tell you the hard truth to your face. I'll tell you what, the people who are my closest friends will always be the people that are willing to tell me the hardest things to my face. Because when you do that, it communicates to me that I can trust you and that you have my best interest in mind. You know what kills a friendship for me? It probably kills it for you too. Is if people have problems or they see something in me that needs correcting and they go to everybody else but me. How's that feel when it happens to you? It's a quick way to destroy a relationship. See, if you want to see your relationships elevate, value the people who are willing to say the hard thing, but the true thing to your face, even if you don't like it. The question is, will you be the kind of person to receive that? All right, because I see it a lot. You see it a lot. A friend will challenge another friend and call something out in their life. And the other person, they're going to be like, that hurt. That made me uncomfortable. I can't believe you would say that to me. And then they'll go to their next friend and say, you'll never believe what so-and-so said to me. Is that even true? And the person's like, well, actually, yeah, it's actually kind of true. And then you're like, I can't believe it. You're working together. And then you go to the next friend and you continue to go down the ladder until you get to the most agreeable friend in your circle. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be challenged, you want to be coddled. You don't want advice, you just want agreement. Have you ever talked to a person that they're talking to you and they're saying they want advice, but it's very clear that they've already arrived at a conclusion? They're just trying to get you to their conclusion. They're not looking for advice, they're looking for agreement. And this is the quickest way to stunt your growth in your relationships, to only surround yourselves with people that agree with you. To only surround yourself with people who will tell you the good things about you instead of calling out the things that could use some work. This is what I call an unhealthy coalition. And you've probably seen some unhealthy coalitions. It's a group of friends that are just unhealthy and self-destructive together. You ever seen that? Where everyone is just sort of on the same page about their self-destruction. A group of friends that refuse to tell anyone in that group the truth about one another. It's an unhealthy coalition, and this unhealthy coalition sort of implicitly agrees with one another to live at a mutual level of self-destruction. Like, hey, we're not going to challenge each other. We're just going to keep the bar real low for all of us. We're never going to say the hard thing, even when it's obvious to all of us. Am I the only one who's ever seen circles of people like this? See, we have these unhealthy coalitions of people that are just saying what one another wants to hear, and as a result, they're keeping one another from actually growing. And I don't know about you, I would rather be remembered as the person who maybe offended you sometimes, but I did it because I refused to leave you in your weakness. And I didn't just call you out for the sake of calling you out, but I called you out in order to call you up. See, a friend doesn't just call you out for the sake of calling you out. It's always to call you out in order to call you up to your highest identity, to your highest purpose, to your highest version of life. See, if you want to elevate your relationships, you're going to have to get to the point where you love your friends more than you love being loved by your friends. And I was pretty proud of that when I wrote that down this week. So I'm going to say it again. Like, if you want to elevate your friendships, you're going to have to get to this point where you love your friends more than you love being loved by your friends. I mean, let me ask you, do your friends feel like you're fighting for them? Are your friendships with people the kind of friendships where you can say hard things? Or does everyone just sort of avoid the obvious? Like everyone just kind of avoids the elephant in the room and pretends it's not there. Can I encourage you today, if you're a part of an unhealthy coalition, it might be worth considering finding a new circle of people that are willing to fight for you and that you're willing to fight for them. How do we elevate our friendships? We make one another better. We stand with one another in our weaknesses. We trust one another, and we make one another stronger. Can you imagine how good your community would be if those 4 characteristics defined how your group operated? That you had someone or maybe a couple people in your corner, that you make one another better, you stand with one another in your weaknesses, that you trust one another, like you know they got your back, and they actually both make you stronger and you make them stronger as well. Like, that is the dream. That's family. That's what I want for you. That's what I hope we are as a church. But just one last thought before I end. Solomon, he kind of ends abruptly in Ecclesiastes 4. It almost feels like a really hard turn in the conversation. He ends and he says, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. It's an interesting break from the pattern of Solomon, right? The entire cadence up until this point was 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 are better than 1, 2 are better than 1, 2 are better than 1. And then all of a sudden he's like, but 3 strands is not quickly broken. What's Solomon talking about here? Many have applied this and said that while 2 people who come together and make one another better, who stand in each other's weaknesses, who trust one another and make one another stronger, while if you do this, it will be powerful. By the way, like, you could even be an atheist in this room, not believe in God, not believe in the Bible, but if you did this, like you just did this in your relationships, you would have better relationships already. You would have powerful relationships. But Solomon goes even further and says, but there's a 3rd strand. And when you bind yourself to that 3rd strand, it makes your relationships not only powerful, it actually makes your relationships unstoppable. And so many believe that what Solomon is telling us here is that when you allow God to be the 3rd strand in your relationship, when you and your friend or your community bind yourself and wrap yourself up in God, that you find yourself in a community and in friendships and family that is not only powerful, which is awesome, but it gets even better. It's unstoppable. And you find the community that will stand the test of time. And see, if it's one thing to walk together, but as followers of Jesus in this room, we're not just invited to walk together, we're invited to walk together as we walk with Jesus together. We're not just called to walk together and to do some life together, and that's great, that's beautiful, it's awesome. But if you want an unstoppable family, an unstoppable relationship, Solomon says, bind your relationship, wrap it up in God, and allow God to wrap himself around you. so that when you go through tough times, you're never broken. And when you feel stretched in your relationship, you do not snap. And maybe for some of you in this room, maybe it's the third strand that you need the most. Maybe you're in this place and what you need the most in your life is that third strand. What you need is that relationship with Jesus. What you need is to bind yourself up, to wrap yourself up in Jesus and allow his love and grace and compassion and mercy to weave itself in and through your life. To begin to reform and inform how you do relationships and how you live your life. Maybe you're here today and the first relationship that needs to be weaved into your life is that relationship with Jesus. And I want to invite you today to choose Jesus. I want you to have the best friendships here in this church and outside. I want you to have the best community. But I want you to have a relationship with Jesus above all else. Because when you weave your life with Jesus, you allow this third strand to wrap around your heart and wrap around your life in Jesus. What you will find is a friend who will always make you better. And it's in Jesus that you will find a friend who will always stand with you in your weakness and in your worst moments. He will never forsake you or abandon you. And it's in Jesus that you will find a friend. You'll find a friend that you can trust. Going to sleep knowing that the creator of the universe has your back. And if that God is for you, then what could the world do against you? And when you bind yourself to Jesus, you'll find a friend that makes you stronger. A friend that will call out those areas of your life that need some work. Those areas of pride and ego, of fear. You have a friend who will make you stronger in this life. And so while I hope you have relationships that elevate, the relationship that will elevate your heart, soul, mind, strength, your life is the relationship with Jesus.